Well, we already 3 minutes late now.
All right, broadcasting in 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the AALI Journey webinar series. Journey is one component of the African American Leadership Initiative designed to provide intentional leadership training and education to individuals. Journey is accompanied by AALI Social, a monthly networking event, and AALI Speaks, a monthly speaker presentation, all in an effort to engage and further develop African Americans in Mansfield and Richland County. As always, we would like to recognize and thank our sponsors, the Richland County Foundation and First Energy, for their continued support of the AALI program. Our webinar today, Conflict and Crucial Conversations, is presented by Renee Thompson, the founder and CEO of Unlimited Potential for Achievement. She is joined by 2 guests who should look familiar to you if you have been following along our webinar series. Mr. Kristen Lee and Dr. Victor Coleman will be joining us for our second half of the series. Thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you, Leona, and welcome to our session entitled Conflict and Crucial Conversations. As one of the managing partners of Unlimited Potential for Achievement, I know that we are committed to the work of organizations such as NECIC. Our mission is to unleash the unique capacities for achievement that are embedded within today's diverse workforce to enhance the probability of personal success and increased organizational profitability. Having conversations regarding leadership development are particularly important within businesses as well as within our communities. I'm so pleased that NECIC has chosen to focus on African American young professionals as an audience. One might ask why, but when you consider the statistics, I think it becomes very apparent. Just consider some of this information. According to the recent study by the Pew Research Center, 49% of African Americans feel they have been treated unfairly in hiring, pay, or promotion. Another 59% say that being white helps people's ability to get ahead. About 75% of Black adults say being Black is very or extremely important to how they think about themselves. And a significantly lesser percentage, only 15% of whites say the same thing about being white. So this is really critical as we look at how do Black professionals within the corporate community excel and exceed. So in today's session, what we're going to do, and for those of you who have followed us, many of you already know that I love to go by definitions as a starting point to make sure that we're all on the same page and within the same sort of framework. So let's describe what defines conflict. And again, I go to Merriam-Webster's dictionary to get the answer to that question. Conflict is defined as fight, battle, war, and armed conflict. Additionally, it's also defined as competitive or opposing action of incompatibles. I think this is important, antagonistic state or action, such as divergent ideas, interests, or persons. And it can also be a mental struggle, so it can be something that comes from within. Mental struggle resulting from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or external or internal demands. And then finally, Webster's dictionary says the opposition of persons or forces that gives rise to the dramatic action in a drama or a fiction. So during these turbulent times, we know that there's no more relevant discussion than that deals with the issue of conflict and having those necessary, those crucial conversations. I've gone over already what defines conflict. And when you think about it, conflict really originates within ourselves initially. How do we respond to the environment around us? So it's important to look at that. And when we think about conflict in terms of intensity, one can reach all the way to 10 as it relates to being in a fight, a battle, or a war, as well as a mental struggle. And we've all experienced having opposing needs, opposing drives, or wishes, both internal and external demands. So many would suggest that most conflict, as I suggested earlier, actually originates from within and then it works its way outward. Whether we are discussing political, workplace, religious, or social conflict, all really comes as a result of the differences in how we process and perceive the world around us. So let's consider the following. How does conflict, or diversity, I should say, play into conflict? So you see on the slide the White House, and you see the symbols for both Democrats and Republicans. And you have to be under a rock not to know that today is a really important day as the House votes as to whether to impeach President Donald J. Trump. But we really need to remember that although there's a lot of hoopla going on about this, and you would think that this is the first time this has happened, it is not the first time. There have been two other presidents that have been formally impeached, both Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. It's also to understand, relative to all the news stories that you hear, all the commentary, that impeachment does not necessarily mean removal from office. The founding fathers, the writers of the Constitution, deliberately made it difficult to remove a sitting president from office. So what it takes is that there has to be a 51% majority of the House to vote, not only to impeach the president, but then after that, there comes a trial that begins in the Senate. And we've already had a sense of how that will go. The Senate will vote on whether to convict the president, and then less than 2/3 of the Senate votes to convict the president, he simply goes back to office. So if the president is indeed impeached today, and many say it's a foregone conclusion, and if bipartisanship holds true, it is unlikely that Trump will actually be convicted. Only one of the three impeached presidents came close to conviction, and that was Andrew Johnson. He was within one vote of being convicted. So when we think about this and we hear this on the news, the pressure to stick to party lines has never been more intense. Moderate House Democrats who flipped in their districts and won the areas where Trump had previously won, they are under enormous pressure to stay true to the party while their Republican constituents are pressuring them to go against their party lines. Also along those lines, Representative Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey informed his staff just this past weekend that he planned to switch. He was a Democrat. He plans to switch his party affiliation to Republican this week, just so he can vote against impeachment proceedings. So even just in sharing that, you can get a sense of just how acrimonious this whole thing is. And somehow in all of this, you got to beg the question, so where are the constituents that voted you into office? It's a little bit frightening, but again, diversity does play a role into this conflict. Here's another example, and this is a picture of at the football game. This is an example of social diversity. So at the football game of the Army and Navy academies, several cadets and midshipmen, they appeared to flash hand signals, hand symbols that are associated with groups that are anti-minority, we'll say, during a nationally televised program game before their football matchup on Saturday. The broadcast shows the cadets from the United States Military Academy and the midshipmen from the Navy displaying the sign at least 5 times behind the ESP and broadcaster Reese Davis before the games. President Trump, interestingly, had also attended the games and met with the players in both groups of players in both locker rooms before the game. So the Anti-Defamation League has described this symbol as a hate sign that forms the letters WP, standing for white power. Officials of the United States Coast Guard have reprimanded a service member already, which did something very similar a few months back and flashed the same kind of gesture in the background during a television interview with MSNBC. So we know that this symbol is something that's been seen before. Again, this is an example of social diversity coming into play. And I want to show you another example. And this, in this slide, what we're looking at, it highlights another example of social diversity. This was an article that was written in the Washington Post a couple of years back, but I think is still relevant today. It was written by Kimberly Kendi and Kimbrell Kelly. This is really a must-read article that describes what amounts to thousands of fatal shootings at the hands of police officers. And this has been since 2005. At the time of the published article, only 54 officers had been charged. Most of those officers had either been cleared or acquitted in the cases that had been resolved. This photo that you see on this slide represents one of the cases cited within the article. The authors described Officer Michael Verleau, who officers say fired 34 shots at the car and then climbed on top of the hood and fired another 15 shots through the windshield. He faced trial on 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter. He said that he felt endangered. Neither one of the passengers, a man and a woman, neither one of them had any firearms, had no weapons at all, no knives, no drugs. This situation happened in Cleveland. Now, before I leave this slide, I would be remiss if I gave you the impression that only Black men are involved in police shootings. That's certainly not so. And the authors, Kendi and Kelly, did a great job of providing examples of police shootings that involve white children and older people. However, a main point of this article was that there seems to be a prevalence of police shootings and fatalities among people of color. So how do we deal with conflict? I want to now come into conflict at the workplace. How do we deal with conflict at the workplace when we suspect that race is a factor within the conflict? Are we merely just playing the race card, or is it true that race continues to impact people of color within the workplace? One of my favorite writers, W.E.B. Du Bois, suggested that African Americans live in a space of what he termed to be a sort of double consciousness. In his work, Souls of Black Folk, and I quote, "The Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world. One ever feels his two-ness, first of all as an American, and then a Negro. 2 souls, 2 thoughts, 2 unreconciled, opposing strivings, desires, 2 warring ideals in one dark body, whose dog strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." I love that quote. Clearly, I quoted it, and I love that because I think that if you talk with many African Americans, most of them have that sense of double consciousness, of feeling like they're 2 people within one body. Published in 1903, that's been over 100 years ago. And 100 years later, here we are in 2019. I'm pretty sure that resonates with a lot of people, right? So now what I'd like us to do is consider the following case study. This picture here is of a gentleman by the name of Ricardo Peters. He's a former financial advisor at JP Morgan Chase. And I want to just share with you this story very briefly, but I think this kind of encapsulates some of the things that we're going to talk a little bit later with our guests about. So here's the story. Jimmy Kennedy, a former NFL defensive tackle, earned over $13 million throughout his 9-year career. And then when you add a few more million for his endorsements, it actually totaled to be about 16 million. But when he tried to become a private client at JP Morgan Chase, he was trying for an elite designation that would allow him to earn travel discounts, exclusive event invitations, and just better deals on loans, better banking opportunities, etc. He felt like he was getting the runaround. Mr. Kennedy didn't get it, but when he went to his local JP Morgan branch in Arizona, he was told this: you're bigger than the average person, period. And you're also an African American. The employee, Charles Belton, who is also Black, told Mr. Kennedy, man, we're here in Arizona. I don't have to tell you what the demographics are here in Arizona. They don't see people like you a lot. Mr. Kennedy recorded the conversation and shared it with the New York Times. Now, Mr. Kennedy was essentially told he was just too Black. His financial advisor, Ricardo Peters, complained that he too was a victim of racial discrimination. Now, what makes this case extraordinary is not that these two men say that they faced discrimination, it's that they recorded their interactions with other bank employees, preserving a record of what white executives otherwise might have dismissed as figments of the aggrieved parties' imaginations. So who is Ricardo Peters? So Mr. Peters started his career at JP Morgan as a salesman in the bank's credit card division. After about 8 years in various roles, he was promoted to a financial advisor position in Phoenix in 2016. His job was to help customers prudently invest their money. So Mr. Peters had won numerous performance awards at the bank, but things began to start going wrong for him. He was working at the JP Morgan branch in the affluent Sun City West area of Phoenix. He had sought a promotion to become a private client advisor, a job that would have allowed him to work with wealthier, more lucrative clients. But the promotion never came despite the numerous awards he had won. Instead, Mr. Peters was actually moved out of an office at the heart of the branch to where he worked with other financial advisors and was relegated to a windowless room in the back of the bank. Eventually, he was fired. One might argue, or one might beg the question, was there anything that Ricardo could have done differently? So what I'd like to do now in this slide, is segue into the whole concept of crucial conversations. As the saying goes, in business, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. But as African Americans in the workplace, how do we negotiate in a way that affirms our work and our dignity? Authors Patterson, Rennie, Maxfield, McMillan, and Switzler, a bunch of authors, writers of Crucial Conversations, provide us with several suggestions. First, let's just talk about, when do we have a crucial conversation? When do we know it's time to have a crucial conversation? Crucial conversations ought to occur, number one, when the stakes are high. So when it's necessary, when the stakes are high, when this matters. Number two, they ought to occur when opinions vary. Don't run from it because people disagree. That's exactly the time you need to have an important conversation. And then lastly, when emotions run strong. Yeah, when people are mad, when people are angry, when people want to curse each other out, that's exactly the time you need to have a crucial conversation. Now, I know that sounds like a recipe for failure, right? Hurt feelings, relationships that are further damaged, misunderstandings. Those are just a few of the outcomes that cause people to kind of recoil from these intense conversations. But rather than run away from these crucial conversations, we actually need to run to them. And here's another person, author Allison Manswell. She's the author of Listen In, Crucial Conversations on Race in the Workplace. She's a certified professional in learning and performance development. She delivered these several remarks at the Faculty of Art and Science Diversity at Harvard University. And one of the things she says is the whole conversation was entitled Silence. Silence is in itself a statement, understanding race in the workplace. And she says, and I quote, "Not talking about race actually increases the sense of bias somebody already has. Studies show that ignoring race can exasperate rather than alleviate issues of race in the workplace." So how does Allison suggest that these conversations be conducted? First, she says, have these conversations by trusting that these conversations matter. Very similarly to the whole premise of crucial conversation, the high stakes, and they're important. And that the dialogue is a powerful force for change. Trust that it is actually important and that it is true. Then be deliberate about looking at the experience from both sides. One of the mistakes we typically make in talking about race in the workplace is that we assume that we're all talking the same conversation, and we're not. We're going to have two sides to the conversation. Talk about working while white and talk about working while Black in the workplace. So what it means to be white in the workplace, dealing with all this diversity, and what it means to be Black, being a part of what's considered diverse and what that feels like. Acknowledge the degree of discomfort and accept that we have to move through it in order for us to make any progress. You know, people like to be comfortable, but when you have important conversations, they're not comfortable. And we have to get over that need of sacrificing progress for comfortability. And then finally, remain committed to the greater good, even when, and especially when, it is personally difficult for you. I think that's some pretty sound advice. Now we're going to kind of jettison back to crucial conversations. So what are the signs, again, as I said before? First of all, your conversation involves high stakes, heightened emotions, and differing opinions. These are the sure signs that your conversation is crucial. So you want to look even for physical signals, such as your stomach gets tight. You know, you see there are emotional signals such as you're angry, you feel scared, you feel hurt. Or look for behavioral clues, such as people raising their voices, okay? Or starting to point the finger at you. Those are all signs that, okay, wait a minute, we need to pause. It's time to have a conversation. People also show signs when they feel unsafe. They may become either silent or reluctant to speak their minds as a way of protecting themselves, or alternatively, they may become more aggressive. They may show signs of where they start to manifest it in name calling, or they start to become threatening or domineering. And then lastly, you know that it's important to have a conversation when you start to feel yourself becoming stressed. Take heed if you start to react silently by making your feelings or masking your feelings, I should say. You don't really state what's on your mind or your heart, or you start to withdraw. You're just like, okay, I'm shutting down. I'm not in this. Later, deuces. Or violently by being overtly controlling or attacking the person within you whom you're speaking verbally. All these things are signals that it's time to have a conversation. So to have an effective dialogue, you need to create an atmosphere where self-expression becomes safe, both for you as well as your fellow discusser. So it's not just important that you feel safe. There has to be an atmosphere where you both feel safe. And there are a couple challenges to making this happen, but you need to be aware of these challenges and overcome these challenges. First of all, is the idea that you're going to right away be at a mutual purpose. And this can be a casualty of a crucial conversation if others believe that you have a malicious intent. So it's important to kind of get at a mutual purpose for why we even need to have this talk. Because if you suspect that the other person has a malicious intent, say you're trying to talk to your boss and you suspect that your boss is about to fire you, it's going to inhibit your ability to have a good conversation. So you want to look for a united purpose so that the other will be willing to listen to your concerns. And in the response for looking for a united purpose, let others know that you're willing to listen to them, whatever their authentic, honest thoughts are, as well as you want to be heard in the same manner. The second major safety risk is the whole idea of mutual respect. And what I mean by that is when people feel or sense that maybe you're talking down to them, you're being insolent, you don't value them. Again, that challenges the idea of having an effective, crucial conversation. So what happens is, quite frankly, people start to defend their sense of dignity. They want to protect themselves, and that's a natural reaction. So if ever the conversation starts going down that rabbit trail, what you need to do is pause and say, listen, I apologize for any action that may have shown that I disrespected you or disregarded you, and really come from a place, yes, I really do respect you. I really do honor your opinion, and I apologize that I've made you feel that way. The next, and this piece is really, really key. You need to harness your emotions. You really need to get a grip on how you're feeling about things. So when you get annoyed, oftentimes you're reacting to external events, right? Therefore, it's you that makes yourself mad, not anybody else, not in reality. A lot of times we say, well, so-and-so made me so angry. But you and only you can create and control your emotions. So it's key, if you're going to have an effective, crucial conversation, to master your feelings when you're angry, afraid, or hurt. And I'm going to give you a couple steps to help you get there. Number one, I call it see here. Start with the facts as you know them. Don't lead off, well, this is the way you made me feel. No, start with the facts. I was 1 minute late and you really kind of hammered me, but there have been other people who've been 15, 20 minutes late, and it seems like there's no reprimands that go their way. State the facts as you understand them. Tell the story. And the story that you tell is not necessarily for the other person, but for yourself. Explain to yourself how you feel and what you think is going on. That's important because it helps you to identify your own feelings. It also helps you to really, if you allow it, to separate the facts from how you feel. And then the third thing is, I'm not telling you not to feel. In fact, I am saying feel whatever it is. Experience certain emotions in response to what you know. So yes, you may be angry. It may be unfair that you didn't get the raise or that you didn't get the promotion. You may be angry. You may be hurt. You may be confused. Experience that, own that. Don't run away from that, and don't say, well, it doesn't really matter. It does matter. And then finally act. Take steps based on your feelings and on your understanding. Okay, so once you've really thought through your story, your narrative, once you've been able to separate the facts from your feelings, then take steps based upon all of that. And again, don't lead out emotionally. Lead out with the facts as you know them. So what are some of the things that allow us to get caught up emotionally? Be careful of these things. It's important that we don't kind of get ourselves doomed in these kind of things. Number one, victim sagas. That's where you claim another person is harmful to you and it's the other person at fault. It's not me. Now, there are times that someone is at fault, but when that is continually your narrative that, well, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so are out to get me, then what you're doing is you're creating a victim mentality. Avoid that, stop that. Also, when you see the other person is having, when you start to see the other person is having negative motives, what that's called is a kind of way of allowing yourself to have these villain narratives within your mind. You you say to your boss, yeah, my boss never liked me from day one. And I'm sure my boss is trying to get rid of me so she can bring on her friend. You know, it's that thing where you see the other person in a negative light. Don't get yourself into making other people the villain. And then lastly, and I see this one a lot, where you have these helpless narratives, where you say to yourself that, oh gosh, there's nothing I can do. You know, I just can't do anything about that. This is the way it is here. And, you know, even if I have a conversation, it's going to make things worse. There's nothing I can do. Avoid being helpless. Avoid those helpless narratives within yourself. Replace these negative stories and these negative narratives with positive ones to get you to where you want. And how do you do that? That might sound easier said than done, but you start to say to yourself, well, you know what? Maybe my boss isn't aware that this is how I was made to feel in this meeting when she overlooked me 5 times. Maybe she's not aware that I took it like maybe there's a racial issue. Maybe there's something I need to say to help her understand what's going on and why I shut down in the conversation. You start replacing those negative emotions with, I can do something proactively to change this script. So now that you've reined in your emotions, you can start to effectively express your position. And what you want to do is that you want to speak to others in a way that persuades them, but you don't want to be abrasive, especially when you're in a controversial or risky sort of situation. And so the acronym that they use is called STATE, and it's a guide in knowing what to say and how. So the acronym STATE, the S stands for share. Share what you know to be true, okay? Share what you know to be true. The T in STATE speaks to tell the story that you want to present, basically from your perspective. Don't start saying, well, Mary said this and John said that, and they all think that. No, just tell the story the way you want to present it. You own it. Then the next letter is ask. Ask others, and at this point, you can ask others to share their stories or their past as a way of confirming, but don't try to rehearse what other people say. Let other people back you up if that's what you need to do, but you don't need to rehearse what they say. The next T is talk cautiously. You know, when we're caught up emotionally and when we think that things are unfair and they're not right, sometimes we get really caught up emotionally. Talk cautiously. Think about the words that you use. Think about what they say, regardless of what's been said in the media. Words do matter. Words matter a lot. So think about what you say. Think about the tone in which you say it. Think about how you say it. And then lastly, encourage others to speak so that you can test the effect of your views on the listener. So after you've spewed out what you want to share, you can ask them, encourage them, say, now what do you think my issues are? Did you understand what I was saying? You know, have them kind of rehearse this. Mastering these crucial conversations are important, and they also involve listening to others, even when they blow up in anger or shut down in silence. You got to listen to others. And to do that, first of all, you need to ask them to express their point of view. Then, kind of metaphorically, not literally, but metaphorically, hold up a mirror to them to show them how their argument felt to you, how it was being perceived by you. So, you know, talk about their body language, their tone. You know, I feel like you're really raising your voice at me. You know, your body language, you're pointing your finger at me, you're giving me a stop hand sign, you're frowning at me. All of those make me feel like I done something majorly wrong. I just show them how what they're saying, how that makes you feel. Calmly paraphrase what you heard them say. Just say, okay, I think I heard you say ABC. By doing that, that lets them know, A, that you listened, and B, that also helps to create a sense of safety. If you begin to feel that the conversation is going nowhere, and it may go nowhere, then kind of prime that person by opening up and saying, you know what, I just think we're not really going anywhere right now. Maybe we need to take a break. And come back and revisit this later. And then lastly, the authors of Crucial Conversations say, remember your ABCs. Agree when you can, build on what's said with more complete information, and to compare what you're saying, what you're feeling, your path to the other party's path. And so finally, there needs to be a call to action, if you will. You know, one of the things we say all the time, and I think it's true, talk is cheap. So there needs to be a call to action. Turn your conversation into a good decision and a mutually accepted and united course of action. So understand that the time you spend upfront establishing a shared pool of meeting is way more important and is more than paid for by the faster, more committed action later on. So choose like one of these 4 methods of decision making. First of all, there's the command, you know, allowing somebody you believe to make a good decision to decide. You know, so that's what we mean by command. Maybe someone else other than you, excuse me, will allow someone you believe to make a good decision to decide. Also, another method of decision making may be to consult. Ask others for their input to influence you before you make a decision. You know, say, okay, so like, what do you think about this conversation now that you've heard both sides of it? And okay, I've heard both sides, I'll make a decision from there. Another course of action, depending upon if it's more than 2, you might want to vote. Agree to whatever the majority of people want. You say, okay, this is a democratic process, democracy rules. And then lastly, consensus. You might want to decide to debate the decision until all of the parties agree upon one solution and a consensus is reached. So those are 4 different types of steps, all of which that can kind of align to a course of action. So no, that's a lot of information to unpack in such a short period of time. I recognize that, but I also wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for our esteemed guests. And I'd like to welcome both Dr. Victor Coleman and his panel partner here, Mr. Kristen Lee. I'd like to welcome them both to our next segment of the session. And now we are actually going to get into where we really talk about how does this all look pragmatically. You know, it can sound like a bunch of theory, quite frankly, and I know I spewed a lot of information and I talked a lot about current events and talked about different authors, and it can kind of feel a little academic. But now what I'd like to do is see how we can kind of, you know, break this down in the way of how does this work out practically. So I'm going to first start off with a kind of basic question, and then we're going to kind of jump right into this conversation. Guys, I am super, super excited, and just need to kind of share that. I always have to, you know, emote here, and I just have to tell you, both of you gentlemen, I really respect highly. I expect great things to happen from both of you. You've already done so much. And so I'm very, very excited to have you here and have this opportunity and privilege to be discussing this important topic with you. So as African-American men, have you ever been in conflict within the workplace in a way that you felt that there were some real racial motivated forces that were behind the conflict itself? I'll start with you, Kristen, and then we'll pass on the baton. to you, Dr. Cooley?
So for starters, it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's actually an honor. I took some time before we got here, just sitting across and reflecting. So all in all, I'm extremely happy to be here today. To answer your question, I've had several jobs that I felt it was really good. The motivation was me being a young Black man and not necessarily having education to navigate through those conflicts. I've learned, to not really complain about things, to more so educate, use those points to educate yourself. And before you guys started, I looked at a couple of things, the victim side of it, the villain stories, the helpless stories. I feel like when you're uneducated, you make your appearance in all of those. So just looking at like how, if you can avoid that mindset, you make yourself better to, communicate the problems instead of bringing on more problems or perceived problems.
Okay. I would like to unpack that just a little bit before we go to this, because you said a couple of things in there I thought were really interesting. You said that in these situations, you were a young, Black, uneducated man. Now, first of all, I personally, even though I'm an educator by profession, I would beg to differ that you are uneducated, because I would say that you have probably been educated in the school of life. And so I don't think you can ever underestimate that. And I'm not saying that just to, encourage you to build you up, but our experiences do matter. And they do inform the direction and how we respond to things. So, no, you're not uneducated. You may not be formally educated, but you're not uneducated. So I would just like to share that from my heart. But I also found it interesting that you mentioned your youth. You said a young Black man. Why do you think that it was important for you to share that? Do you think your youth came into play there?
Definitely. Because I think racism is broken down in kind of stages because it's taught for starters. So you see kids they never really have a problem with that other person. It's like they just have a friend. But as you get older, you're starting to see the separation. So when I say I was young, I had an older boss. I kind of felt like I got the old white man hate. It's like a different type of racism, like the grandpa who shoots off the porch, shotgun, and everybody knows kind of that age. So,
So the kind of conflict that you experienced, you felt that there was some generational aspects to it too, that took you back to another day.
yes,
That wasn't part of your day.
correct. Like a story of my uncle, grandparents.
Yeah.
That type of deal.
Okay, all right. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Victor, how about you?
Yeah, I've experienced it, even in my current role. I've experienced it in the office and outside the office. So just a week ago, I had a discussion with the leader of the company, and I always feel like I'm a game changer. I come to shake things up. So one thing I've done in my career is I've always worn a hat, and it bothers people that a man will wear a hat indoors. And it's me challenging the norm. I've always challenged the norm, but what it was for me was, well, let me tell you what the complaint was. The complaint was at my level of leadership, I should be taking my hat off when I come indoors, and that's it. So just because I'm a leader, I should take my hat off in the door indoors. What about everyone else in the company? Why wouldn't they remove their hats? So I didn't respond right away when I heard the complaint. I took some time to sit back and really gather my information, my data, before I responded to the complaint. And then I had to sit down with the leader of the company. And I said, so the complaint again is that I wear my hat indoors, right? And, yeah, so I led from there because I had understanding what the complaint was. So I challenged them from the position of, one, why is my identity always in question? What you let me know in that moment was I wasn't safe in corporate America, regardless to what degree or experience I had, because my identity is always in question. I've cut my braids to make me feel comfortable. I've cut my dreads to make me feel comfortable. I dress a certain way to make you feel comfortable. When am I allowed to feel comfortable in this corporate environment And that's what I think is a big issue is we're constantly conforming in this D&I environment, but is it really D&I if I have to conform to what you look like and what makes you feel comfortable? What diversity are you truly including if I conform to your ways 100%? So we had that discussion. It was a great discussion. The leader listened. It was probably about a 45-minute discussion. They listened, they took notes, and then they responded with an apology. And I knew they weren't coming to offend me when they brought the information to me, but I was sharing with them that in a D&I environment where we're looking to recruit people who don't look like us, there's some things we're gonna have to accept from people who don't look like us. There's some things we're going to get comfortable with, right? Now, over time, they may conform, they may choose to change and grow a certain way. But just at the door of it, why do I have to look like you 100% in order to be accepted in your organization? And I knew it was racially motivated by the people who had filed the complaint, because I look at Caucasians who sit outside of my office that wear the same thing, that wear hats like I do. But because I'm a leader is what they added to it. So is that person less than me because I have a title? No, they're not. They're human just like I'm a human. They're a man just like I'm a man, because you said men remove their hats when they come in. So challenge that man the way you challenge me. Or don't challenge him.
There's a pregnant pause because there's so much to unpack in that. Because what I think that really just so effectively illustrates is the quote I read at the onset from W.E.B. Du Bois, that kind of double consciousness of, okay, here I am capable. And so in all of that narrative that you just shared, and correct me if I'm wrong, so maybe it was there, you just didn't share this aspect, but I didn't hear anything questioning your ability to perform well, your job.
Exactly.
Okay, so there was none of that.
Nothing questioning my ability to perform.
So then I have to go back to something else then, because now I'm putting, because I have worked in corporate America, so now I'm putting in that kind of corporate thinking hat. When you were interviewed, was there any indication that there was a certain mode of appearance that was to be accepted within your organization?
No, I wouldn't say that there was. Obviously, those who sat across from me didn't look like me, so their appearance is what you assume is the appearance they want you to have. But there was never anything that was brought into question of whether you have to conform to this way or that way in order for this to happen.
Okay. So nothing explicit. And then how long have you been with the company?
14 years.
Oh, okay. So for 14 years, and now it's a problem? Okay. Just a little curious to me. Yeah.
After 14 years of wearing a ball cap every day, literally every day. I probably got 100 hats on my body, literally every day. But what I did was I took that moment to educate that person on the difference of not just the racial tension that it created for me or how it made me feel unsafe. Again, there's a generational diversity here too. And I've always challenged norms since I was a kid. I'm going to always challenge it. That's how you bring change. When I asked the gentleman, did you even understand why men removed their hats when they came indoors? He didn't have an answer. And I didn't, it's not a bad thing that he didn't have an answer. Most people don't go research what they're taught, but I do. And when I shared with them that it goes back to the medieval times when soldiers came inside, they would remove their steel helmets because they felt safe. I paused and said, maybe I don't remove my hat because I don't feel safe. But let's go one step further. Why don't women remove their hats? Because we denied women the right to be soldiers at that time. So they would remove their hat coming in the door. And I paused again. I said, well, let's go one step further. That tradition was carried on by the Christian community. Did you ever ask me if I was Christian? Is that my belief? See, we have to stop assuming that everyone has the same belief as us because we were raised a certain way or our parents taught us a certain thing. Not that I'm not a Christian, not that I'm Muslim, but you never once took into consideration that level of diversity. And that's a problem.
Well, first of all, I would suggest and offer that maybe you need to think about a career in law. Because you certainly have that linear analytical mind that sets that. And secondly, I think you speak to something else in a very compelling way, because even beyond racial or generational differences, just something as fundamental as individuality. As a person, as an individual, maybe I just love hats. And on one hand, our country is a country that suggests that it embraces individuality. I think about, for example, Steve Jobs. He's the one that started and was notorious for wearing the black trousers with the black turtleneck and sneakers and walking across to open up his series to talk about his newest and the greatest product that he had, which was totally against the norm, because up until Steve Jobs, of course, everybody wore a suit. And Steve Jobs said, no, we're gonna break that. I don't wear suits. I don't enjoy suits, so I'm gonna wear a turtleneck. But because it was Steve Jobs, that was thought to be quirky and cool. So it's just interesting what you share, because, you know, what it suggests in my mind is, yes, there could be racial overtones. Yes, there could be generational overtones. But it also suggests that as a culture, we really don't believe what we spew, and that everybody has the right to be an individual. We don't really believe that, not really. Because on one level we say that, but on another level we want you to conform. So, did you have anything, Kristen, you wanted to kind of add to that, or was it? Yeah, because you really shared that. So, you mentioned, both of you mentioned that you have experienced, you know, those areas of conflict that you thought were racially motivated. How difficult, again, I'm gonna go back to you, I think you shared it a little bit, sort of, but we're gonna get to you in a second. But Kristen, were you ever able to confront the situation? And if you were, how difficult was it to get to that place of having a meaningful conversation, discuss the conflict as you saw it, not as they wanted to project it, but as you saw it?
Well, I tried 3 different ways. The first was from the personal side, speaking on it. Second was actually having coworkers mediate. Third was actually going above that person's head, but ultimately I got I got blackballed, got fired, and worked for the company because of speaking up. But I later ran into the owner of the company, and she had like a, you know, here's what I'm doing now type discussion. I got a lot of apology. I got a lot of understanding of what place they were in as a that corporate position. So I don't know. I deal with racism different. I try to understand people, and that helps me not react off emotion, be more strategic about how I do things. It's easy to put your hands on people, but I think a nice intellectual bubble feels way better.
A nice intellectual bubble. I appreciate that. But something you said kind of struck a thought, and that is that you said you had this conversation with the owner of the company, I guess?
So it was a shoe company. So my manager was more of the problem, but the region manager, the district manager, was the one I had a conversation with.
So you have this conversation with the district manager, and after having the conversation with the district manager, do you walk away feeling any sense of, oh, okay, maybe I could have done things better, or, oh, okay, maybe I could have presented my case differently, or I could have, did you have any sense of that ownership that maybe I could have done something differently?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if I would have been more patient on how I approach the person, instead of just, you know, the aggression, it would have been a better conversation to begin with. So taking ownership of your emotions and your actions before you approach people, and kind of looking at how would they feel on the other side of the room instead of this is what I feel. I think it's always three sides to a story, so having a mediator of some sort actually helps.
How hard is that to do, to control your emotions?
It's easy.
Okay.
I'll be honest, we're here for this ally event. I'm a black man. I don't ever forget that because I understand that my normal bent could lead me into a position I don't want to be in. I've already looked dangerous. I already look like I could be a problem. So just thinking about what I'm thinking. So, hey, like I want to grab this cup. Why do you want to grab this cup? That stops you from doing stupid stuff. And, you know, when you're in your emotions instead of your strategy, you do stupid stuff. Trial and error.
Well, one thing I think that you speak in a very, very compelling way, and I don't think we talk about it enough, is the kind of self-awareness that says, okay, this is what I feel and what I think. That's one level. But there's another type of self-awareness that says that this is how others perceive me. We usually forget the flip side of that coin because I can be all caught up with, well, I didn't mean anything harmful, I didn't mean anything, rude or whatever. But the other person looking at you can just have a totally different perspective. And to your point, you're a black man. So that automatically, and deep dark black man, and automatically that triggers, for some people, negative thoughts because they already have in their minds who black men are. You're dangerous. You react, you get angry, you're aggressive, right? Victor, so I want to go back to you and your story because I thought that was fascinating. I'm intrigued on so many levels. And to me, that was an HR issue on so many levels because, it's 14 years that I've been here and I have not ever complained about my work ethic or my ability to perform my tasks. No one else externally has ever complained about my work. I provide quality work. But because a couple people suggest that my hat doesn't represent a person in my position of leadership, that calls for a discussion is interesting to me. So for you to have that discussion, was that very difficult for you?
It was difficult because, and when I started the conversation, I said I apologize in advance if I seem angry or upset or if I sound aggressive, I'm apologizing now. It's not that I'm angry with you. It's not that I'm upset with you as an individual, but I'm very passionate about this conversation and this discussion. And they thanked me for that, up front. But it was a difficult conversation because part of me said, you know what? You have options. Move on and let them have, this space. Then the other part of me said, no, you're representative of me to come. And you need to have this discussion, educate. Because I set out on this mission to educate and to bring change to focus at it. So it was difficult. It took me 2 weeks to respond, 3 weeks to respond. But I wanted to make sure my response was not out of emotion and based on facts, history, and really open the door for some future conversations for growth. For all of us, for all parties involved.
That's good. That just sounds so very mature and very reasoned. I just need to say this for the record. So here's something that I just experienced. Now I just want to know that I'm not the only one. So misery wants to accompany this, okay? I always think it's very interesting when I'm in a workplace environment that when I want to bring an issue to the forefront, and maybe I have this demeanor, so I'm not smiling, I'm not jovial, I'm very direct. Here's a problem I see, I'm concerned about this problem. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this, but I want us to discuss this. Then sometimes the feedback I can garner later is, and this has happened to me on a couple of different occasions. My goodness, the neighbor was just so angry. She just seems just like like, just like she was ready to explode. And so there's that angry Black woman syndrome. And, you know, I'm a little tired of that label, because why is it that when I'm being direct, when I'm just stating the situation as I see it, and I want a solution, I want to understand that that gets what I term to be mislabeled as angry. So, you know, after a certain point, and as I said earlier, you know, there's that internal awareness. I'm angry, I'm confused, I don't understand, and I need a direct answer. There's that internal introspection, then there's that external awareness. Okay, sure, I'm not smiling, I'm not joking. That's seen as being an angry Black woman. Do you ever have that sense of being angry Black men? Because you may not walk into a room and not high-fiving everybody or fist pumping and, hey, what's up, man? You know, you don't want to, you know, talk about the latest sports event. Have you, either one of you experienced that kind of just that sense that that's your persona? You're smiling at me.
Yes, I've had other conversations with others in the organization early in my career that I probably mishandled, that I'm sure came off as the angry Black man in the room, which led to how I handled this particular conversation. My son asked me something a few years ago, and I didn't really know how to take it, but he asked me one morning on his way to school, Dad, how often do you think about your race? And
How
I
old
think
was
about,
your son? How old was your
he
son?
was 16 at the time.
Wow.
And I told him I think about it every day, multiple times a day. I think about it every time I go to make a decision, every time I go to open my mouth, when I get dressed, because I represent other Black men. And I want to make sure that I'm representing in the right way. And I'm opening doors and helping, you know, blaze a trail that opens opportunities. But also I think about it as a gun owner, how will I be perceived when they see me carry my gun in public? You know, I don't carry my gun in public when I'm wearing a jogging suit, because I know I'm received differently than when I'm dressed with a suit and tie. Why? Because America has that stereotype that once I put on that jogging suit, I'm not Dr. Coleman, I am the thug from the neighborhood.
Wow, you know, that's really powerful for a 16-year-old to even have to ask that question. One of the things, according to the Pew Research Center, I thought was fascinating, that there seems to be an increased awareness among white people of their whiteness, which is something that's very different than in the past. And they attribute it to this whole climate of Make America Great Again. That in the past, well, I've never thought about race. I don't think of myself as a white person. And that commentary was pretty honest. I mean, it was, I think for the most part, they didn't have to. But now there seems to be more and more, not only an awareness, but almost a badge of honor, if you will, that, you know, I'm a white male and I'm proud of it. Well, nobody shouldn't be, but that there seems to be more of that kind of discussion. I noticed, Krista, when I asked that question, you kind of smiled too. What were some of your thoughts of, have you been perceived as the angry Black male?
I think it's every day, honestly, because I've made a conscious shift of working problems out with my hands to working problems out with my mind, from the teenage years to the 30s. And what you see is that the moment you look at people or the generation under you, you have to be more impactful with your actions. You can't work things out with your hands. So it gets a point in time where, like, some people who only knew you for the past you, they don't allow you to evolve into the new you. And
very strong.
It's like you become a target when you choose to be nice, because being nice is a choice. You are like a target. I feel like I'm more so targeted for things because people know that I'm going to be more of a thinker versus physically doing something. So I think that's a combination of years of just feeling like young black men can't vent like we vent different. Like our way of venting is not like anyone else in America, I would say. We can't, we're not allowed to. So the frustrations of just learning how to properly build that bridge of communication to whoever you're speaking to, it's frustrating. Because to be honest, you know, if you see me with my kids versus you see me with the quote unquote thug that I'm trying to give options and show them that it's a different side of life, you'll see a different thing with me. But that doesn't mean that I should, at one point, feel like I should be frustrated articulating myself about whoever I'm talking to or whatever. So that's more of a personal problem with people. I'm going to continue to be me. So if it's aggressive, whatever, if it's not good enough, whatever. I think all in all, you just make better decisions when you surround yourself by better decision making. Right.
Wow. Well, once again, and this is why I enjoy talking to you, John. I've got a couple notes here, some things I want to unpack, because two things you said I think are so powerful. Number one is that, and Victor, I think you can relate to this, which is why you started sharing this, is that people often want to hold you captive to who you were. You know, like, okay, I've left that life. You know, I remember that life. I'm not in denial. I'm not in the world of denial, but that's not who I am anymore. But people typically, and I think it's because of their own comfortability, to be quite frank, they want to hold you captive to that. And I would dare say in this culture that we live in, that as African-American men, you sometimes are held captive to my preconceptions of who you are. Because if I could just go ahead and treat you the way I think all black men are, then I could feel comfortable and move on. I don't have to take the energy and put the steps into, oh my goodness, you're different. You're not what I thought. So I just thought that was powerful, that commentary of how we tend to be held captive. You didn't use that word captive, but I understand that we tend to be held captive to who we were. The other piece I really appreciated that you said too was about how, in order to be better, you often have to surround yourself with people who are different than where you've been. Now, tell me something, how hard is that? Because, your boys in the hood be like, man, what's wrong with you? You Dr. Coleman now, you think you're better than somebody? Like, I remember you were, bro.
They're definitely gonna challenge you. Some of them say, you're gonna always be Playboy Dick to me. And I laugh and say, okay, if you stuck in that space, I'm gonna allow you to be stuck in. But if you wanna be free, let's go and find your way out as well. But for the most part, my change has been well received in this community, and I love that. My community for that. But you do have those select few people who will hold you hostage to who you were. And I'm okay with that. It's to be expected. It's going to be a hater in the room. If you get a hater all that attention, though, then they won. And I don't care who you are.
But I think that's one of the challenges we have as African Americans. So we have the W.E.B. Du Bois of the double consciousness. So there's that. But then there's it's like a tripod, if you will. Because then there's that other consciousness of, but I'm not like where I came from either. I wanted something different. And that doesn't mean I'm a sellout. That doesn't mean I'm a Tom. That doesn't mean I forgot where I came from. I just want something different. And I think like no other group, no other ethnic group, I feel like African Americans have that tension of, this is who I am. This is what they want me to be, that American ideal, whatever that is. And then here's the people over here who are saying, like if you've ever, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read Michelle Becoming, that was one of the things I thought she expressed that, articulated that very well, that where she came from, Chicago, outside, like a lot of her, as she would say, her peeps Like, girl, you think you're better than somebody because you went to these Ivy League schools? No, I don't. You know, I'm still down, but I have to aspire for something more. And I think that for African Americans, and I think if you really, like for Tiger Woods, for example, I think that he discovered his blackness when he, you know, had that situation with his domestic situation. Because up to that point, you know, he was every nationality under the sun. But when it came to that point, he discovered that he was like just like Michael Jordan or anybody else. He was very black then. So I think America has a way of reminding you who you are if you forget who you are. Sammy Davis Jr., I think Diana Carroll, she wasn't respected back in the day for Julia. She was thought to be a sellout, but then toward the end of her life, she shared, yeah, this was who I was. I didn't forget. So
I think you said something I wanted to touch on.
mhm,
You said, in our community, you want to still be down, or, you know, consider down.
mhm,
And you can be down and be changed.
mhm,
I'm down in a different way. Where I thought selling drugs and running with the crew, getting money was something. Now I do it the legal way, and I show you how to do it the legal way, and we go buy those properties in our community and we restore. I'm down for my community. I'm just down in a different way. I'm not down to bring you down. I'm actually down to uplift you if you want to know the truth. So it's not our problem as a changed individual. We do have a responsibility to educate those who don't understand that we are still down. But unfortunately, our community is probably our biggest critic in that space, that we feel like we're selling out if we change. But then you walk into a corporate environment and then try and change your identity. That's what that battle does for you. You got it on both sides of the table.
you really did. You really
And it becomes hard.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one thing I would share too, though, I think, and I think particularly my generation, I shared this with my colleagues here at NECIC and anyone else who will listen to me. I think as a baby boomer, an African-American baby boomer, I remember the riots. I remember the riots when MLK got assassinated. I remember that very clearly as a child being terrified. You know, we had curfews, we couldn't go out. You know, we couldn't go to the grocery store, we had to be in by, so I think it was 7 o'clock at the time. And I remember that very well. I remember the riots of the 60s, and I remember always being afraid that, okay, one of these days I might be killed or something because people were getting killed. I remember the Vietnam War and writing my uncle and thinking, I wonder, even as a child, I was probably that little egghead little kid, but I remember just thinking, well, my uncle is, you know, back then we were in Negro colored, when he was over in the Vietnam War. And I'm thinking, well, why is he fighting over in that war? And they kind of don't respect him because I remember Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali. And I thought, he should be like that, right? I had another uncle who was in the military, who was in World War II, and he said, Renee, this is our country. And I'm like, but how come it doesn't always feel like that? So it's just really, really interesting to me that we all have our stories, like you said, we used to do drugs, sell them and all of that. I think that story does need to be shared, not as a defense, but as an education to our. And so I don't think my generation did enough to inform your generation or to inform millennials of the struggle as much as we should have. Because I think that some of the, like this whole thing with police brutality, that's no surprise to most baby boomers, because that's what we grew up with. We expected a police officer not necessarily to be, you know, friendly or, you know, protecting us, right? I mean, that's what we knew. But I think, you know, our kids were like a little bit more surprised. I thought they were supposed to protect us. And what we do, while we felt we were protecting them about not sharing some of those terrible things, we actually made them a little bit naive to the realities of what it meant to be Black in America. Want to share this with you because I encouraged you to read that opinion article that was written by Tanesi Coates entitled The Cancellation of Colin Kaepernick. I thought, you know, first of all, I'm a big Coates fan anyway. You know, anybody who knows me knows I follow everything. Even he had a fictional piece, and I read that too. I follow everything that he's written. But I thought it was a powerful perspective on the challenges Black men face in standing up for what they believe in. So I recognize that what Kaepernick did was controversial in the sense that some would say, well, okay, he was standing up for social justice. The NFL didn't do anything to him. He was just standing up for a social justice issue. Maybe that was a juxtaposition, so to speak. It wasn't right? Because, okay, the NFL didn't do anything to him. So why wouldn't he comply with the NFL? And why would he think that he was standing up for a social justice issue? And so many would think that that was unrelated. And I think that's kind of the perception, that it was unrelated. So, and one could debate that back and forth, as well as on top of all that, you know, the role that Jay-Z played in trying to assist or not the whole Kaepernick scenario story. But I want to capitalize on a couple of things first, and then we can delve more deeply in that if we have time. But I wanted to ask both of you, have you ever took a stand at the workplace for something that you both believed was absolutely just wrong? You know, may not have been directly involved with you, but you just felt like how somebody was treated or how the situation was handled. This is wrong. And have you ever felt that you were canceled? And that's why I love that article, the cancellation of Colin Kaepernick. And if you ever just felt like you were canceled, in other words, just, okay, that just didn't happen. It was just, you know, lost hope.
No, I like what you said. What you
Yes.
spoke to was
Yes, I will always stand up, whether it's on the job, off the job, the mall, I don't care where it's at, I'm standing up for what's right. Again, I feel like I'm a change agent, so I'm willing to be that sacrifice if I have to be for justice to be had. Do I feel like I was canceled? There was a moment in time where I felt like, okay, now I'm being overlooked because my way of protecting or speaking up for those who didn't have the courage maybe to speak up for themselves. I felt like it did come against me at one point, but what I did was I took a step back and I started to question my approach in the challenging that I had done. And that's, you know, like you said, you become more aware. Why am I grabbing for this cup? Is there a better approach to me walking in this room and challenging who's on the other side of the table versus me just yelling and becoming really irate because what they're doing is wrong. Some people do wrong and don't realize you're doing wrong. So the approach has helped me, I think, continue to grow in the corporate environment. But yes, I have spoken out, and I do feel like there were times where I was overlooked because of the way I spoke out.
to agree with Brother Vic. I've experienced some of the same, but I think 2019 showed me just honestly like accountability. People complain about a lot, you can say people are doing this and doing that, but you got to be honest with yourself. Sometimes what you asked for or what you spoke up for, because it was so true to you, you actually brought about the change in the environment and the universe that you want. So you being pushed out of a position or stopped from a position, you look up, it always works out in your favor. You always get the position or the career path that you were actually searching for, the opportunity you were searching for. So I don't know. I don't complain that we stand up for something I feel is my truth. And I'm, like I said before, I'm gonna stand for it. People are gonna die by trying. I don't expect anything other than, some resistance. Resistance lets you know you're on the right track. So you don't feel resistance in anything, and go get somebody else.
Wow.
No muscle ever got stronger without resistance. So, I mean, that's just what it is. I want to add something to that though. On the flip side, we also have to be honest with ourselves. Some of the opportunities that I thought I was being overlooked on at the time, I was angry about. But when I step back and I look at it, I have an understanding that one, I wasn't really prepared for that opportunity, and it was God protecting me from embarrassing myself. you know, so again, being honest and being honest enough to say, hey, you know what? So when you are honest with yourself in that experience and then the next one comes, you approach it differently, you look at it differently. Maybe not as angry because you realize I didn't have all the credentials for that role. Yeah, they didn't either, but I just wasn't selected. I can't always use race as why I wasn't selected. I didn't meet the qualifications. It's the bottom line. Sometimes we have to be honest in that space.
And you know what? And sometimes that's the hard thing to discern, to be quite frank. You know, how do you discern between it being a racial issue, I'm just not ready, maybe a social issue, a technical issue? You're right, but again, that requires stepping back and being willing to hold a mirror in front of yourself and say, would I have really been ready? Again, you guys always bring up more questions for me than anything else, and the word accountability came up. And the reason why I wanted to kind of tap onto that is because I'm sure you're familiar with Gabrielle Union and the whole piece with America's Got Talent. And one of the things she said, and I thought it was very, you know, whether you're a Gabrielle Union fan or not, I thought this was compelling when she said, basically, what she was saying is she wanted to hold people accountable. If the rules were there's no smoking, then there should be no smoking. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are Simon. There should be no smoking. Accountability. Do you think that that's something that we have a responsibility to help people become more accountable in the workplace? Or how do you measure the balance between, you know what, this is my responsibility to help you be accountable versus, you know, that's not my war to fight.
I don't try to raise wrong people.
Okay.
I feel like leading by example, and if you are able to share with people, sometimes you will take a liking to those around you and give more than what you normally would have to. But I don't feel like you should feel compelled that you have to change everything and everyone around you. Kind of like what Brother Vic said earlier. If you keep chipping away at who a person is, you can take away from their diversity is. Maybe that weird thing that you don't understand about them is actually their strength, and that's probably why they're tired of working.
Okay.
I think we need to hold ourselves accountable, and that's definitely with by example. I hold myself accountable to do my job, to whatever it is in life, whether it's at home, whether it's in my community. I can't worry about what the next person is doing. Sometimes we put so much energy into what my neighbor is doing that we don't even do our job. And we're just as guilty being at that point. I focus on Victor and what Victor has to get accomplished. And if you don't get yours accomplished, so be it. And now we're on the same team, I'm gonna catch you along the way and pull you to the side of the discussion. But all in all, no, accountability is of self. I can't make anyone else be accountable for their actions if they don't want to be.
So just playing the opposite end of that. So do you think Gabrielle Union was inappropriate in her response in speaking out against Simon and against Jay Leno, saying that she was basically saying she was holding them accountable? Do you think that was inappropriate?
I don't think she was inappropriate. Her approach is her approach. That's what works for her. Just for me, I feel like it's my job to hold myself accountable and to focus on me.
Interesting. And again, I think this is where we sometimes have to sit and kind of fine tune what it is that is really our issue. Because fundamentally, the whole issue was kind of like with your hat was her hair. That was the fundamental issue. And then it kind of spread out into other issues. So Jay Leno said this, Simon does this. But fundamentally, it was because she got called on the carpet because she was too ethnic with her braids. And so, and this might be really a good place to kind of park it, maybe until after the new year, who knows? But sometimes we have to be very focused on what our issue is. You know, with Colin Kaepernick, it really may have been that he took issue with what was said in the song. Now, it spread out until obviously he was protesting police brutality, that's what he said. I'm not sure really whether that was the appropriate venue or not. But it might have been very much the appropriate venue if he was staying just focused on the song and saying, oh, you know what, there's a few lines in there about slavery, this guy was a slave owner. And if he had focused in on that, maybe the narrative that we are facing today would have been very different. I don't know. Maybe if Gabrielle had focused more on why is anybody questioning my hair, I was never given anything that said I can't wear braids, I can't wear that. Maybe if that had been the focus as opposed to smoking or, you know, commentaries like Jay Leno, maybe that would have been a different narrative. Who knows? I mean, we can always second guess ourselves.
There's never a right approach for everyone.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly right.
Anytime you question what is considered the norm or you protest what is the norm or what is widely accepted, there's always another way that they felt you should have protested. They, you know, I'm grateful that Rosa Parks didn't get up, right? She pushed against the norm and she brought change. So if you think that a protest or someone questioning the norm is going to be comfortable, shame on you.
Yeah. Frederick Douglass once said that in order to make change, he said that there's going to be struggle. You know, the other side is not going to like it. And it's foolish to think that it will be done nice and easy. It won't really be war because people want to hold to their opinions. I think you're absolutely right. And in closing, is there anything that one of you want to share with us? Any words of wisdom as we end up 2019?
Me personally, you have loved ones, you got family, you got people that you care about. Just take some time to take time. And what I mean by that is you use this holiday season to get to learn your family, your friends. Spend time creating memories. Don't really focus on dollar amounts. Don't focus on, you know, who has the latest, whatever. Because competition is actually the thief of you really enjoying what's most important, and that's the time. We all have, I guess, a borrowed time slot that we're on. So you never know when your clock is going to be punched. Enjoy this time with your family. It's the most important thing.
Excellent.
I don't piggyback on that. You know, 3 years ago, I stopped doing Christmas. I told my family I was done buying gifts, and I meant what I said. We would take trips and we'll make memories, and that's what we do. Because I realized I was putting so much money under the tree and spending so much time making the money to put the gifts under the tree that I did not spend the time enjoying my loved one. So to piggyback off what you said at this time of the year. But then as we go into the new year, man, let's get them goals on the wall and let's hit the ground running, J1 and don't look back. You know, 2019 is over. If you won, you won. If you lost, you lost. But hopefully it's a lesson you learned in both.
Wow. Well, I can't really add anything to that. Thank you for being a great listening audience. 2020, I think, is the year of vision. And so we can clarify our vision, we can clarify our focus. You know, it's unlimited, the things that we can accomplish and achieve. So thank you so much. Happy holidays to our audience. And look forward to seeing you in 2020.